those that will carry the mutation. Those that will carry the mutation are going to operate out of this circuitry, but specifically this circuitry in terms of this center circuit or this main circuit as being the focus in that sense of what they actually are. In other words, one of the things that you'll notice here is that there is a change that's taking place in the circuitry. It's a dynamic that is shifting, and I want to begin with what we saw this morning. That is, we saw the way in which the mutation operates through the 4 stages. Once we get to that point that the 4th stage is complete, that we have the breaking between the 49 and the 19, that's the moment that we have a new circuitry. Now look, those beings who do not have the mutation, that the circuitry itself is still going to be altered, but they're not going to be able to take advantage in that sense of the octave circuitry within them. This word, octave, you know, it's one of my things as a 62 that I bring words into the world. And octave is a special word. The auto, or at the beginning, is about self. And the IVE ending is rooted in seeking. And so this is a word that means the seeking of self. But more than that, that AUT at the beginning also has a relationship to, in English, what we call sameness. And so in looking at this circuit, that this circuit is about seeking the self, but seeking the self through seeking sameness. In other words, they are designed to be able to recognize their own. And they are going to seek out their own. They're going to seek out those that are exactly like them. And anyone who comes into the world after 2027 who's not carrying the mutation will not be like them. They will be different. The description of autism, the antisocial quality of autism. This antisocial quality will be self-evident, that the autive being, that this rave is not going to have social interactive skills with humans. Just as the autistic child has difficulty in having social relationship with humans, only in the context now, because it's not the time, we see something wrong with them. They are here to seek their own. And that you can see that this circuit that we watch, the mutation of this circuit, is that in seeking their own, they have a fixed principle through which they seek with the other to become self. To seek with the other, that's the same to find self. Our first awareness, the splenic awareness, is animal. It's not personal. It's the animal response to the demands of survival. The mind is deeply, deeply, deeply personal. Creates the illusion of being alone, lives in the illusion of that separateness, and that the mind is forever just for the individual incarnation and nothing more. Yet the moment that you come to the awakening of the solar plex center, you come to an aspect of awareness, not awareness. Not awareness that is mine, not awareness that belongs to me. An aspect of awareness. An aspect of awareness seeking other aspects of awareness, in order to find self, in order to find the whole. And in that word find, actually becoming the whole. But the process will never get all the way there. The process begins with seeking out the other. I had a vision is not the right word. Just yeah, just some kind of movie flash in front of my eyes. And I had this flash of a maternity ward. You know, one of these rooms where they put all the babies after they're born. And there might be a dozen or 2 dozen or 3 dozen babies in this room. And just imagine what that's like, that you have 2 of them that are mutative beings who are in that room. You know, doesn't matter whether they're beside each other, doesn't matter any of those things. It's one of the things about this mutation is that it's going to change the way their aura works. They're immediately going to be able to recognize each other, and how traumatic it's going to be for them in that sense. You know, to be able to hook into something, but they're never going to be fully a part of its existence. There's no physical connection. This is not the intimacy of humans that have to rub up against each other. This is a totally different environment that's developing, an awareness environment that's developing, in which you do not have to be in the same village and you do not have to be in the same tribe. They're simply going to have a capacity to recognize that sameness in the other. That's what the whole autive circuit is about. It's not about seeing, and it's not about hearing. It's something else. It's something else. I don't know what it is. When you look at this illustration, one of the first things to recognize is that mutation as a format is taken away from everything other than this specific circuit. In other words, that the mutative potential is being taken away. That mutative potential isn't there anymore. In other words, that the human being, or the human being as we understand it now, that it is at the end of its line because the mutation is literally being pulled away. The mutation is all oriented into the autive, into this transformation that's taking place. I want to show you a few things in terms of the way in which the circuitry is going to operate before I come back and focus on the autive circuit itself. The first thing is to look at what happens to the 19th gate. If you look up there to the circuit that's now called experiential, that's basically what we know as the abstract circuit. And if you look at that, you'll see that there are 2 fundamental changes that take place in the way in which this circuit operates. The first thing is that the 63rd gate, which has been the pressure gate of the logical process, that the 63rd gate does not move through to the 4th gate. Now, think about that from what we looked at this morning. The 4th gate is the opposition of the 49. The 49 is the gate that initiates in the final mutation of stage 4 the breaking with the 19. But its mirror will also break. In other words, there will be a mirror reaction in the 4th gate, and the 4th gate is going to break its link to the 63. So one of the things about the experiential way is that not only is it going to be confused, but it's going to be full of doubt. In other words, that whole pressure at the mental level is all going to go into the experiential way, yet the experiential way also will get at the other end the 19th gate feeding into it. In other words, the dynamic of need thrown in where desire fades. And to recognize that that circuit is emotional. And that circuit is emotional in the sense that it operates out of an emotional wave. That wave is not going to go away in the experiential. So here on that side, what you have is a certain amount of chaos and confusion and doubt that are suddenly going to be a part of the human experiential way. And one of the things that will happen with the need, the 19 going in there, is that you're going to have a huge retro movement. I mean, I already talk about that jokingly, about all the retros I meet. You know, people who, you know, they would rather be in the 4th century, or, you know, they study 3rd century arts, or They want to go back to ancient Egypt or whatever the case may be. In other words, there's going to be this desperate last searching for God, for temples, for all of those things that are rooted in the 19. And so the experiential way is going to be a very, very difficult circuitry for people to live with. You know, again, in looking at any kind of circuitry, recognize that circuitry is complex, that rarely do people only have a circuit in their design. But certainly those that are going to carry that strongly as definition, they're going to be much more chaotic than the abstract people we know now. Much more. Because they're going to be driven by a deep need within them. And that deep need is going to be driven by the suspicions and doubts they have. And so, you know, this is the end of the human way. You know, and at the end of the human way, because evolution jumps, it's not like you suddenly get your reward there. The reward is now the enemy. And the enemy's gone. You know, and you're left to peter out at the edge. I mean, I know what that's like. I'm a manifester. You know, I should already be out to pasture, but what to do? You know, this is the way that it goes. The yang-yang, you know, the yang-yang will be eliminated. That's the way it goes. Things serve their usefulness. One of the things you can take with you in this moment of recognizing your Neanderthal affinities is that we've been useful, after all. Useful for the development of consciousness and the growth of consciousness, because that's part of our process. So we're going to have a major change in the way in which life is experienced. And there's going to appear to be, at least from the perspective of that circuit, a lot more chaos and a lot more pressure in life. The basic transformation that's taking place in what we understand as collective circuitry. We've already seen that the abstract circuit that we understand becomes pressurized in an unusual way. In other words, it's taking on more mental pressure and it's taking on more root pressure. And if you wanted to give the experiential way a nickname, you could say it's nihilistic. In other words, it can be very destructive and it can be very wild. In other words, there doesn't seem to be resolution, there seems to be only pressure. The moment you move over to the logic, or what is logical circuitry ordinarily, here called the collective, the first thing to recognize is the forward breaking with the 63, all the mental pressure goes away. And the moment all the mental pressure goes away in the logic process, that is, that the moment the question disappears, that the moment that that's gone, no longer do you have a perfecting process, you have a repetition. And this is the circuit of fatalism. This is the place that you get to where logic says, well, this is the way it works, and we are Neanderthals, and it is coming to an end, and what to do, and that's it, and let's keep on repeating what we've been doing for centuries, because that's what we know, and let's just keep on doing it. In other words, there is a fundamental repetition that's going to take place in the collective. There's an end to that pressure that there must be more, that there's something else that needs to be answered, all of that. In many ways, they both represent, remember, the collective is left out of this, as always. I mean, the collective's left out of this. This is individual and tribal. And the collective is always left out. And both those aspects of the collective, as we know it, they're really going to feel the doom and gloom. You know, they're the ones that are going to say, oh, all of this has been terrible. We've been here 200,000 years and now they don't need us anymore. You know, and the other side is going to say, well, all right, this is as far as we could go and this is what we understand and that's it, okay. You know, what's for breakfast? In other words, the collective is left out of the process. The other thing is, the collective as it's understood here within this circuitry, these are going to be very, very cool people. Cool. I mean, not just because of the fact that it's no solar plex, because of the fact that there's no pressure. They don't have anything that they need to answer. They don't have anything that they need to prove. All they're going to want to do is repeat the same things over and over and over again. You know, this very funny movie Bill Murray made, Groundhog Day. You know, and in this movie, this guy gets to live out the same scene over and over and over again. Well, that's pretty much what the collective wants. Listen, don't talk to me about mutation. It's scary. You know, I just want to do the same thing tomorrow that I did today, and everything will be okay tomorrow as it was today, and everything's fine. Don't bring me scary mutation. So the collective, you know, you can see what's going to happen to the collective circuitry in beings who are not part of the mutation. You know, part of them are just going to say, okay, you know, this is what's happening. And the other part is just going to go nuts. One of the things that I've been mentioning all along in design in regards to the design of forms, and particularly since Pluto has been transiting in the fifth gate, is the recognition that all forms of life have a common order, have a common relationship to each other that exists through the channel 15.5, the channel of being in the flow. And you can see that this channel of being in the flow is outside of its mutative possibilities now. And that channel of being in the flow, literally the octave is outside of that flow. It no longer fits into what is that general pattern that is inherent there in the collective. Above here is the material. As long as we are in these forms, we can never escape the need as biologies to feed them. That it's essential for us to be able to gather material in one way or another. And that the material circuit here, as you can see, is very different in a sense, from how we know it. In other words, that it carries with it part of what is both of the tribal circuits, the defense circuit and the tribal circuit, as a combination between the two of them. And this is all about the reliance on the splenic capacity to be able to survive. And that the survival for the tribe, the survival for the gene pool. And of course, this is one of the things. You have new talent coming into the world, and the new talent needs to be supported. And the reality is that inherent in this material circuit, it's tribal. Remember, anything that's going to be tribal, anything that's going to be individual, is going to resonate to the mutation itself, is going to resonate to what is octave. And so here, this material tribe, this part of the circuitry will provide the necessary dynamic and skills to be able to bring sufficient material into their lives so that they can support themselves. There is going to be a real transformation in the way in which population is going to work on the planet. We're going to have an enormous decrease in population. But the replacement of that population by technological means, which is what we're going to do, is enormously costly. Costly in brain power, costly in resources. And one of the things that's essential to be able to maintain life on this planet, at least this kind of life on the planet, is to be able to have the resources necessary to be able to do that. Without those resources, you can't. You know, my experience with my youngest child, you know, being in a hospital for 3 months when it was born premature, and having all of those services that nature would have provided for basically nothing. All you have to do is feed the woman, right? You know, all of that basically for nothing was hundreds of thousands of dollars. You know, in other words, the resources have to be there. Those people that are infertile, those people that are trying to have children in vitro and all of that, you don't want to see the bills they're getting, because it's resources that are necessary for those things. So one of the things to recognize about life on this planet is that no matter what the beast looks like, the beast has to earn a living. I mean, the beast has to be able to feed itself. It has to be able to get food. It has to be able to nurture the tribe in order for the gene pool to continue. So it will remain a dynamic theme. However, it's pure capitalism. It has absolutely nothing to do with the social balancing that we normally have in the tribe, in which you have the 40-37-1949 acting as a communal, responsible, supportive balance to the basic capitalistic tendencies that are on the splenic side. And so one of the things to see very clearly in that is that the economies of the future, you know, the capitalism that you have in America today is going to seem absolutely socialist by comparison. In other words, you're just not going to have that balance anymore. What you're going to have is a highly competitive capital market. And that highly competitive capital market based on economies that we are only beginning to glimpse now, that have nothing to do with the old kind of economies that all of us have been working with for the last several hundred years. You know, it's not tribal. It doesn't say tribal there. It just says material. So it's not tribal. That's the first thing. Second thing is, in talking about the nature of the 4426, we've seen that the 4426 has to do with temperature. And I talked about how there is a transformation, part of this generalized mutation that's taking place, in which the ability of the 44, in order to be able to keep things cool or keep the heat potential of the 26 in balance, that the 44 is losing that capacity to do so, that the body as a result is heating up. And one of the things to recognize about that configuration is that this is not about the ancient past and the cool passive economy of chewing on grass. You know, this is not the passive cool, this is the hot aggressive 26 at the other end. In other words, that whole cooling mechanism is breaking down. So one of the things to recognize about the future in that sense is that the future is going to have a real thing with resources. Who is going to control the resources? Because for the first time ever for us, something really incredible will happen. You see, life won't be cheap anymore. That's an amazing thing. See, life's really cheap now. We can afford to lose 40,000 babies an hour, and we do. And other than the intimates involved in that process, the planet doesn't even recognize that most of the time. But you see, when every life is an enormous investment in resources, and it will be, those lives have a different value. And we're about to enter into a phase in which life is not cheap. It's really expensive. And those that control the resources can control what comes out. Because after all, we're going to be the ones that are making more. And we're the ones that are making more in images that we select. And so who controls the resources, that's something that's going to be very important. And that's the competitive battleground of the future. This is where you still have the old territorial 45. You know, this is where you have all of that. It's sitting there. And it is the resources that are going to matter, because if you don't control the resources, you got problems. And of course, it's going to be very difficult for traditional Homo sapien to compete with the rave. They have a different way, they will have a different way of being able to communicate with each other. I don't know how all that's going to work out, but what I do know is that built into everyone who comes into that world is going to be a deep competitive drive to control resources. Very important. Much more important than it was in the past to control territory. The real theme is who's got the resources, whether those are intellectual resources, physical resources, whatever the case may be, it's the controlling of the resources. Like the person who comes up with a patent for a 9-month incubator. You know? If you have the eyes to see it, it's all around you all the time, showing its colors. It just does. All of these aspects. One of the biggest businesses in the world right now is the trade in human flesh. It's one of the biggest businesses in the world now. It's beginning to rival drugs. You know, the smuggling of people, the selling of people, the whole business of the value of human flesh. I want you to grasp something. You see, the moment that the octave mutation takes place, it kills what we call sexuality and the normal way in which we reproduce. That's coincidental or part of the whole mutative theme of the defertilization of humanity. I mean, that is our end game challenge, to go beyond what would be ordinary extinction. And the only way we can go beyond ordinary extinction, to create life in our own image, to become God, is that we have to be able to make more. And we have to be able to make more outside of the sex act. Now, of course, the Autiv isn't interested in that. You know, what's interested in that is the material, because the material is caught up in the fear of the 44, let's not be extinct. That the ambition now is all pumped into that, but most important of all is the 50-27. If you go back to the mammalian design, in the mammalian design, the 50-27 is their sexual reproductive intimacy. It is their herding instinct to keep the herd alive. And so within this one-time tribal configuration, the whole thing is, these are the people that are going to make more babies. They're the ones that are going to create life. And they're the ones who are going to recognize that they have to be able to have the resources to do it. And whether they create this kind of being or that kind of being is going to be conditioned by their relationship with this or that. It's going to be very interesting. This is a force that is there to be able to find the resources necessary to keep on making more human beings. And those human beings, they will have a value. They will have a value. They will be a resource in and of themselves. See, look, if we're sterile, and there's one guy somewhere or one woman somewhere who's got a machine that will allow you to give birth to a child, you think they're going to give that to you for nothing out of their concern for the species? If you believe that, I have bridges to sell. You know, they're going to charge whatever they charge. I mean, the world's a business. It's going to stay a business. As long as we're biological, it's always going to be the business, but the business is going to be creation. The business is actually going to be the making of life itself. This capacity that's inherent in the 45-21 to protect and serve. You know, one of the things about the 45-21 is that ultimately they will mutate themselves, but they will mutate beyond the time that we are biological, so that the transformation of the 45 is from the I have to the we have, which is a very different kind of configuration. However, one of the things to be very clear about is that this is a deeply, deeply possessive circuit. Without the emotional qualities, without the communal qualities that are there. This is a deeply possessive. And it is here in the 45-21 that the control will be there to decide what costume somebody wears when they come into the world. Remember, one of the things I teach people about the 21, you know, you're the one that's in control of what you eat. You know, you're the one in control of your territory. You're the one who's in control of what you wear. Now, if you take that to a cosmic level or a mystical level, if you will, one of the things to see clearly about the future, I was just musing on that, so it's fun just to put it out there. You know, if you need to bring a cross into the world, if you need to bring an incarnation into the world, there are all kinds of people that may bid on that, you know, to get their piece of genetic material into that, or whatever the case may be. But the reality is that the selection process is going to be here. And it's one of the things that's interesting about the fact that neither of the processes will go to their completion. That is, humans will not die out. There's not enough time. The rave will not have a chance to completely flourish. So there is a mechanism in which they can not so much live together, but share the same planet together, in the sense that this planet can provide them with a home. The controlling agent of that is going to be the material circuit. And it's going to be through this material circuit that that kind of coordination is going to take place. So that circuit in the future, is going to carry with it an unusual gift of being able to find a way of balancing things. But remember, for a prophet, this brings us to the two circuits that originated out of or what we know as individual circuitry. And I'm going to begin with what is listed here as the individual. You'll notice that individuality has lost its 360. In other words, that the mutative format is not there, the 3955 is not there. In other words, that there has been a major shift there. Also in terms of the individuality, that the 2057 and the 2838 that were a part of individual circuit, now you can see that is split off and that is connected to what is integration. And integration as well as initiation. In other words, out of the original 3 individual circuits, what we basically have is 2 that emerge. One that is called individual, one, as you'll see, that is called binary and operates uniquely in a very different way. So we're going to start over here with the individual. Without the mutative, in order for something different to emerge on the planet, difference has to be enshrined. And we're going to have a lot of difference on the planet. And the differences are going to be self-evident. You're going to have the collective ones that are just repeating the processes. By the way, that's very enlightened. Never forget that joy and enlightenment lie in the 5th gate. That coming to the point of understanding that there's no need to pursue any further, things are what they are and they operate correctly, is a great state of wisdom. So there's nothing lacking in that. However, if you're looking at the way in which these work, you're going to have the collective logical, you're going to have the very wild, nihilistic, needful, confused, doubtful abstract. And then when you come to the individual, you're going to have those that simply are alone. Remember, the moment you take away sexuality and desire, there's nothing that's calling somebody else to you. And this is the aspect of individuality that is born to be alone. It just wants to be alone. You see, we're going to have different kinds of beings on the planet working together in different ways. We're going to have solo acts. These are solo acts. We're going to have binaries, as you'll see. We'll have binaries. We'll have bizarre multiplicities, which is the octave. And we'll have various kinds of collective configurations through the collective and the experiential. All of that under the guise of, the world is a business and everybody has to eat and all of the stuff that's in the material. But there's going to be different kinds of ways that people operate, and it's all going to be accepted. So one of the things to see clearly in this individual is that this is an individual that is always a lone wolf. They don't need the other, and they operate alone. They don't operate in unions. They rarely bond with anyone at any time. They simply live in their own. And by the way, they're the only thing we're going to have that resembles art through them. They will be alone. They will be an artistic expression. They are going to bring us whatever the art and music of whatever the future is going to look like, but they are going to be solo beings. You see, we have a complete crashing of the gender differentiation. And that crashing doesn't mean we come to a point of clarity. It just means we're finally going to see that there are different ways in which beings can thrive on the planet, and that the standard role model is gone. So no longer is the pure individual, the solo individual, made to feel guilty because it's not making a social contribution, or that it doesn't have a stable relationship, or all of that stuff. It won't care about any of that. None of that. So this is one of the movements that's going to take place, and these are going to be the beings where that's going to dominate in their design, where it resonates to their cross, whatever that may be. These are going to be the kinds of beings that will never link up with anyone. And of course, they will thrive in that. And by the way, they will all be like priests. Genetic dead-end streets. All of them. You know, like eunuchs in a harem. All of them. It's just interesting. Their creativity, in that sense, will be a very different kind of creativity. I have my own thoughts. I get lost every once in a while in all this. One of the things that I want you to keep in mind so that you don't have any confusion, no matter when somebody is born in this century, they're going to be born with the same planets activating the same potential of 64 gates. They are still going to have one of the 4 types. And it's still going to be their design, it's still going to be their strategy. Those that are born with the mutation, they will experience the octave circuit. And they will experience the octave circuit ideally. In other words, it is meant for them. And that doesn't mean that they have those gates activated or not. It has nothing to do with that. If they are a mutative being, they're either going to come out through the activated gates or taken from those of their own kind who have, or whatever. And yet at the same time, the circuitry shifts are going to impact on everyone. Let me give you an example of what that's like. Let's say that you're somebody who has the 4th gate now, and you manage to stay alive to 2027. At the moment that the mutation clicks in, what happens to you is you stop asking questions. I mean, all of a sudden, the pressure for asking questions disappears because there is going to be that shift in the circuit. In other words, the link between the 63, the link to the 4 is going to be cut off. So anyone who is alive is going to experience whatever shifts are there in the way in which the circuitry operates, but they're still going to have as their protection, their type, their strategy, in order to bring them through their process. And again, please remember, we already see that ourselves. You know, you can see how we're all a mix. Most of us, I'm not, I'm an exception. All of us basically are a mix of circuitries. And of course, there is going to be all of that mix. There are going to be people who don't carry the mutation, a very strong activation in the octave. And one of the things we'll notice about these people is they're very flat. I mean, they're flat. It's not like you get an emotional anything from them. There's a certain quality to them that will be recognizable because they can take advantage of the mutative potential that is there. But they're still going to have access to those gates, access to what's going on as a program in all of that. Remember, we are not separate. We're all in this together. We're all experiencing this mutation together. And those of you here in this room who will die a human might come back a rave. In other words, we're all experiencing this. This is the way that it works. So it's very important that you see, look, yes, there's going to be a shift that's going to take place. No question about that. That the circuitry is going to go through a transformation, and we will notice it. We'll also notice that our abstract friends are suddenly nuttier than usual. You know, and basically those of my generation who might get to that point late in their life, they're really going to look different. You know, it's either the 90-year-old that's finally at peace, the collective, oh, I have no more questions. It's all okay for me. Or the 90-year-old who's abstract, who decides that it's time to try out cocaine or something in order to see if there's anything out there that might be possible that they can do. You know, there is going to be impact on everyone, but not everyone is going to be able to live out the octave potential. We come to the other side, we come to the binary side. The binary side's very interesting. First of all, you have a combination of a number of things here. You have the integration circuit, the 2010-3457. You have the addition of the 2838, the channel of struggle, and along with that, the addition of the channel of initiation, the 2551. This is forming this binary circuit. It is precisely what its name suggests. We have already seen that the individual is going to be the solo act. Here what we're looking at is the binary act. One of the things that we discussed in looking at the gates of love, the 28th gate, and the capacity of the 28th gate to transform integration and transform it in such a way that integration does not operate alone, cannot operate alone, but in fact needs to have and needs to empower and be empowered by the other. I also talked about the competitiveness that comes with that. In other words, that these are forces that need to bond together as a binary so that through their competition they can empower each other to excel. And added to the 2838 competition is the classic competition of the 2551. Now all of this is about pair bonding, but not pair bonding like anything we've ever seen. For years, when people have asked me about homosexuality as an example, I have always pointed to the 1057, and I've always told them therein lies the potential of love that denies or ignores gender. In other words, it can simply do without it. It can be heretical. It can be a martyr in that sense. It can do any of those things. What it can do is that it can ignore gender. Well, this binary, has no need for gender bonding. Now, it doesn't mean that it won't take place. In other words, one of the things you're going to see out of this circuit is that this circuit is going to hold together the pair bonds. And it's going to hold together pair bonds that are male-male, that are female-female, and that are mixed. And it isn't going to make any difference because there is no reproduction. It's not a gender question anymore. It's simply about finding the right empowerment force. And you can see that out of these brief descriptions, there's a diversity that is opening up. And it's a diversity that is opening up. Basically, it's opening up in four ways. There's the solos, there's the binaries, there's the collective ones, and then there's the octave. And of course, again, this is one of these basic formulas, that's there in the mechanics. So the binary is going to be one of these other aspects, and the value of the binary is they're incredible at staying alive. They're the most competitive ones. They're the ones that are best equipped to stay alive, and they can only stay alive by having this relationship with each other. These behavioral changes, they'll begin to take place right away. The behavioral changes will actually take place long before there's enough octave beings in the world to actually make a difference. In other words, the changing of the circuitry is also going to bring about these fundamental changes in the way in which human beings are going to operate. The pressure being taken off the logic side, the pressure being added to the abstract. These basic changes, the changes in material approach, all of these things are moving in that direction, so you are going to have that as, all of us, all of those that are alive at that point, all of those that start coming into the world, all of them are going to be subject to that kind of field. It brings us to the octave itself. Truly, I would love to be able to describe to you what that's like. And I can't. I'm a mental being like you, and we're limited. We have two awarenesses. We don't know what it's like to have the third one. Can't know what it's like to have the third one. Can't dream it, can't intuit it, can't feel it, can't even really imagine it. Oh yeah, we can come up with our fantasies, we can come up with all of those things. But in not being able to in not having what is the fundamental difference of the octave, there is no way that we can link to that experience of awareness. You see, because of the nature of mind, it's impossible for us to imagine what it's like to be an aspect of mind. It's impossible. We have our mind. We have our us awareness, and we know that nobody gets in here. You look at my chart a million times, but you're not going to get in here. It's locked in, and I don't share it with anybody because I can't. Nobody can get in there, and I can't get it out because that's the limitation of mind. It was so that we would go through this self-reflective, unique, individual, lonely, terrifying process of surviving in this life. We don't know what it's like to be an aspect of awareness. There are so many ways that I've tried to create metaphors for that aspect of awareness. To imagine what it's like that you cannot complete any thought on your own. Think about what that would be like. You can't complete a thought on your own. Not only that, it's not about completing the thought with somebody else. It's about completing the thought with many, many others. There is nothing that is yours alone in awareness. Nothing. Nothing. It's like all of us in this room trying to create a sentence, and each of us gets to add a word. And we don't know what the sentence is going to be. And we don't know whether our contribution is useful or not. We have no idea, because we don't know what it is until it's there. And it's there out of something that is greater than us. And there is no us. There is no us because there is no separation. You see those babies in that delivery room? The moment that they hook into each other, they're never separate, ever. And they'll continue processing together for as long as they're alive, no matter where they go. It's something we cannot possibly grasp. And every one of them that comes into the world will be linked in the same way. And that the awareness, the consciousness field, what everyone wants to call that, will just continue to expand with depth. And yet there is no uniqueness. See, we look at autistic children and we say, well, they can't be social. Yes, that's right. They're the bridge. It's unfortunate at a personal level. We all know that. But in terms of evolution, no, it's not. This is an ongoing biological process because we got to get there biologically in order for the mutation to work. And of course they're going to be antisocial. They have no need for primitive social interaction. They can't imagine being alone. They can't imagine only having another. And there is no thing as the collective for them, because for them awareness is everywhere. How different from us. And we have no idea how that works. And we have no idea what the language is. You see, our bodies speak our splenic language for us. Our minds have created a language field. We don't know what the language of this will be. We don't know how that communication will take place. We don't know any of that. You see, this is a new species. It's not like us. It's of us. But it's not like us. And we are deeply, deeply primitive when compared to the potential of what that awareness is. But think about these autistic children today, what we do with them. We institutionalize them. These autistic children that are going to come into the world, many of them may never speak. Many of them may show no social connection whatsoever. They will all have something strange in their eyes. They will all have problems with their teeth. And my assumption is that those that are pure autive, that their diet will almost exclusively be liquid. And that has to do with maintaining the way the awareness operates through the emotional system, which has so much to do with liquid in the body. They're going to be very different. Same look, sort of. Same gates activating, sort of. But that mutation changes everything because you have an awareness there that we do not know anything about. I have so long to imagine what that might be. And like the collective that's coming, I just said, to hell with it. I don't know, and I can't know. And they won't tell you either. What we come to in the end is we come to the revolution of the spirit. That's histidine. That's the 4955. It's a revolution, and it's a revolution that comes through the emergence of spirit consciousness, spirit awareness. The only circuit here that will actually be truly emotional is the experiential, or what was the abstract. And one of the things to recognize about this transition is that the world will actually be a much quieter and more stable place. Now, the individuals will still carry their emotional quality, that is, that individual circuit that's rooted in the solar plex center. However, they are the solos, and they will have very, very little impact with their emotional state on anyone, in terms of auras. They will be aura avoiders. So in fact, one of the things that the revolution of the spirit will bring is that there will be a kind of peacefulness that'll descend that's actually quite unusual, that we've never really known before. The tension derived from the chaos of the emotional wave is something that will be gone. And remember that those people that are going to have solar plex activation, and solar plex activation that comes through any of the octave gates, if they're not mutative themselves, they've got a flat emotional system. It's flat. It doesn't put out anything. I don't know how to describe that in any other kind of language because I only know it through that phrase in my head. It's flat. There's no highs, there's no lows, there's no wave in that sense. It's just a flat energy field. It will have a quality. There's no question about that. What that quality will be like, I do not know. I really don't. I can't. However, the fact of the matter is that the planet as a whole, as a result of the revolution, as a result of the mutation, is actually going to be more peaceful. You see, this is not about a battle to the death between the old and the new. It's not what it is. You see, that's the human killer monkey way of thinking. And of course, the killer monkey is going to have to compromise with the transition that comes in these circuits as a result of the mutation. It's going to be less able to live out that killer monkey style. Not only that, but the diversity in the planet is going to break up. In other words, you're going to get more and more solos, you're going to get more and more locked in binaries, you're going to get more and more diversification in which, you don't care what they're doing over there. And there is no competitive need to kill them in that sense. We're going to be deeply dependent in the future on projectors who are intended to be at the top of the hierarchy, and those projectors that are going to be strongest in what will be the material circuit. Because all of that will need to be organized, and all of that will need to be sustained. But it's also important to see that the dream that people have of peacefulness and blah, 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 they're actually going to get it. They're going to get it in a funny way, but they're going to get it. It's going to be a much calmer planet to live on after that transition. Much calmer. And 100 years down the line, even more so. And it's the last thing that I want you to keep in mind. It's going to take time. It's going to take time. It's going to take time for all of this to take place. After all, it's been going on for hundreds of years already. Ever since 1781, we have been in this mutation. And we have been in this transition period since there. We're not going to complete that transition period until 2027. It's hundreds of years just to get this movement to this point. And then it's not like all of a sudden, bang. It's going to emerge then. Trends. There'll be trends. There'll be new kinds of relationship trends that people see. All of a sudden, there'll be, sexuality will stop being such a big thing. It will take its time and momentum, and it will slowly all emerge. That's the way it goes. It's been very nice for me to share this with you. I don't often get to do my Bizarra collection. This is part of my Bizarro collection, so it's fun to get this out. It's fun to have witnesses. You know, I like that. I like the fact that in 2027, somebody's going to be able to stand up there and say, "Oh yeah, I was right," you know? Which I may not be here, but I'm sure that, you know, somewhere, someplace, the vibration will feel